I had been married to a man who was essentially full of rage, very controlling, and I found myself really in the cage of his rage. So as powerful as I was in my job and out in the world, I was 180 degrees from that when I was at home behind closed doors.
Ladies, can't we all connect to that statement on some level ourselves? Don't we all have an area in our life that really goes well, where we can project to the world the image of, hey, we got this? And then you turn around and there's another aspect of your life that is not going according to plan, that is really, really difficult. And you may show up as a very different person in that part of your life than you show up over here. If you ever had this discrepancy of one part of your life goes really awesome, the other one really sucks, I know I can relate, then you must watch this week's episode of It's Never Too Late to Live a Life You Love with me, Bettina Gordon-Wayne, because today I have no other than Master Coach Nancy Levin on the show, and Nancy's story of transformation. From corporate superstar, when she was working for Hay House, the world's largest publishing house, focusing on self-help and transformational books, to becoming a multiple best-selling author herself, a master coach and the founder of the Levin Life Coach Academy, is hugely inspiring as well as educational. So today, really, grab your journal, take some great notes. Today, you're in for a real treat.
Nancy, I am so glad you're here with us today, because your story, I think, is so full of so many facets and such a beautiful example of a woman who is reinventing herself in her 40s and in her 50s and really is like on the rise. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Nancy, I would love to start a few years back, because I think that's important. So you're like in your late 30s, early 40s. You are married for quite some time already, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you have a very, you have a beautiful job with Hay House back then already, correct?
Yes, I was the event director for Hay House. I began that job in 2002, and I held it for 12 years.
2002, okay. So please, what happened? So for all intents and purposes, you had such a beautiful life from the outside, you know, the beautiful job, the marriage, everything. And then what happened?
Yes. So it's very true, because I spent a lot of energy and effort projecting an image of perfection to the world and managing the perception of others. So I really only wanted to be seen through the lens that I gave others to see me through. And so, yes, while I had this job at Hay House, which was my dream job, I was traveling the world, producing live events with the greatest minds, teachers, healers in the field of self-empowerment. And yet the truth of the matter is that their teachings couldn't really land in me until I was in my own crisis. And so this, yeah.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. And so this crisis in my own life occurred in the implosion of my marriage. So I had been married to a man who was essentially full of rage, very controlling, and I found myself really in the cage of his rage. So as powerful as I was in my job and out in the world, I was 180 degrees from that when I was at home behind closed doors. So I had no voice, I had no say, and I didn't even know that what I wanted was something that could even be considered. I had long lived under the idea that it's better to be self-sufficient, independent, and have no needs. And so essentially on the day that my husband and I met, it was literally as if he said to me, "Hi, I'm broken." And I said, "Well, great, I am Superwoman and I will fix you." And so essentially, you know, our marriage was this marriage of core wounds. And as our marriage progressed and as we became more enmeshed, I sublimated all of my wants and needs in order to fulfill all of his.
Amazing. Thank you. Two questions, please. How old were you when you guys got married?
We got married. I was 30 years old when we got married.
Okay. And you said something before that you were keeping up appearances, so
Yes.
that you had that people looked at you and saw a perfect facade. When you did this, Nancy, in those years, did you do it automatically, or were you completely conscious that you are doing it?
It was sort of both. I mean, I think that essentially I was so ashamed of the way I had been disappearing in my own life that I didn't want anyone to see that. So I was creating this persona for people to be able to see. And I think this is what we do. We begin packaging ourselves to be digestible to others. And we start hiding the parts of ourselves that we think we have to hide in order to be loved and accepted.
And I know, because today you are coaching women, do you see this happen relatively often, that we get into a marriage and then lose our voice and start to putting up, you know, this beautiful facade to mask for others? You're saying yes. So you see it.
I see it all the time. I see the ways that we lose ourselves in love, because I think that there is this notion that we're supposed to lay down ourselves for another person, that love means abandoning ourselves for the sake of another. And so much of my work, all of my books, all of my coaching is really about the ways that we really need to be the ones to bring ourselves back to life when we have disappeared.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And before you could do that, though, you had a big crisis happening. How many years were you married already when that happened, and what exactly did happen?
Sure. So we were married in 1995,
Mm-hmm.
and then in 2008 is when I would say, you know, all hell broke loose, in the form of me coming home from one of my Hay House trips to discover that my husband had read my journals. I'd been an avid journal keeper since I was 11 years old. I had over 70 volumes of my own personal journal.
Wow.
And the upshot of all of this is that when I got back from the trip, he made it clear he'd read my journals and that there was hell to pay. And as I was on my way home, I had to really take a few moments to get clear with myself around the fact that I had been hiding for most of my life, certainly most of my marriage. I had not wanted to let anyone see what was going on behind closed doors. I ultimately didn't want to know my own truth, and I didn't want anyone else to know my truth. But our marriage had been crumbling for quite some time. And so when I got inside the door of the house, he was holding 4 of my journals, and he said, I'm going to copy pages and send them to your friends, your sister, your parents, your coworkers, and let's see what they think when they know the real Nancy. So here's the thing. He knew that my greatest fear was any sort of exposure. And no one knows how to push your buttons like someone you've been married to for that long. So in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I knew I could go back to sleep, essentially, and stay in the role of the people pleasing and the peacekeeping. But the truth of the matter is that when we are so invested in keeping the peace at all costs, it comes at a very high cost. Yeah. And it comes at a high cost to us. So when we're doing whatever it takes to make everything be okay, it takes a high toll. And I knew in that moment that I needed to make a choice. And so the truth is, it took me 2 more years to leave the marriage. But I left the house that night. And I went and stayed at a hotel nearby. And very early the next morning, after very little sleep, he called me and said, if you're not home in a half an hour, I'm calling your parents and I'm telling them the truth about you. And because I knew he wasn't bluffing, and because I knew it was time to start taking responsibility for my own life, I got both of my parents on the phone and I said, listen, I want to let you know that it's highly likely we're getting a divorce. And my mother said, you know, what happened? And I said, well, he read my journals and discovered that 8 years ago I had an affair. And my mother said, without missing a beat, I'm so sorry that you've been carrying this around all by yourself for 8 years.
Wow. So here you were thinking you can't tell anybody, and your mom is the first one to say, I'm so sorry that you did. Oh, that's beautiful.
It was actually one of the most pivotal moments of my entire life, because I knew in that moment that the dissolution of my marriage would be the great healing with my mother. And it has been.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, it took me 2 more years to leave the marriage. I still was very selective about people that I told the truth to.
Yes.
I had only told my parents because I did feel that I was up against a wall and I wanted to be the ones to share it with them. I only shared it with some very close people. It would still be nearly 2 years before I really shared openly about what was happening in my life.
But I think this is a very, very important point that you're making here, that, you know, you have this pivotal moment in the realization, and yet to go from here to here, it can still take some time. And it took you 2 years. And I think it's really beautiful that other women hear this too.
Yes.
That, you know, that complete transition can take a long time. And I know from our pre-interview conversation, I think you left 3 times, right?
5 times. I was kicked out of my own house that I bought and paid for 5 times. And the 5th time was the time I did not go back. And I would say that the 5th time was when I was about 45 years old. And it was the first time in my life I ever set a boundary.
Wow. Wow. We'll come back then to the book that you just wrote, which I really felt, you know, you gifted me with the electronic version. And I felt, is this really like all that happened in your life in the last decade or 2 is the culmination, is the book. It's like,
it's true. It's true. Every single thing that every aspect, everything I've been through, everything I've worked through, everything I have coached my clients around, everything that's just been in my sphere has made its way into this particular book.
Yeah, comes to light in boundaries.
Yeah.
Nancy, question. What would you say to a woman who had like a pivotal moment or is very close to one, but she can't do things, you know, she may have children, she may have whatever, but this, to make it okay, that it can take 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the foundational piece is, are you willing to tell the truth to yourself? First and foremost. You may not be ready to tell the world the truth. You may not be ready to take action even, but are you willing to be with yourself in your own deep truth? That's where we have to begin.
Beautiful, beautiful. So it took 2 years. By then you were in your early 40s. Did any, you know, were you thinking about having children? Did that factor also into your marriage? What is it with you and babies?
Yeah, no, never. I never, ever once wanted a baby. Never have ever felt the thing that women say they feel about having babies. So I'm very grateful to be an aunt. I think being an aunt is the best thing in the whole world. I have a phenomenal niece and nephew. I am ever grateful to my sister to have my children for me. No, children was never an issue or an option for me.
Okay. I find this super, super important to mention, because I think there are so many women that have children because it is expected of them. Yeah. And I'm sure that you yourself dealt with, maybe even from your family or your sister.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I got married, it wasn't soon after that my mother, you know, at one point my mother said to me, why do you keep telling me you don't want to have children? And I said, well, why do you keep asking me? If you keep asking me, I'm going to keep telling you.
It's funny. So she just expected that you at some point change your mind.
Yeah. And I think, I think somewhere along the line, it became clear to me, and we've had adult conversations about this, that she, for her, it was also the experience of me dismissing an aspect of her identity, and me, and a way in which we wouldn't be able to have a shared reality. So, so it's a way in which my sister and my mother can have common ground, both being mothers, and my sister even being able to be like, oh, I get this now, on a bigger scale, in a way that I can't or won't be able to. And I think for my mother, it was difficult that I wouldn't ever be able to get it on the larger scale.
Okay. Yeah. I saw that with my mother the other way around. I had my child at 44. And it was the first time when I told her I'm pregnant, and through the pregnancy and then the first year or so after Hunter was born, she was actually really nice to me. She was loving, she was attentive, Usually she was the one who just talks about herself, but in that, because now we had something in common. So I understand what your mom may have felt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Do you think it is, or how important is it for women today, in the third millennia, in the 21st century, to really listen to their own calling, to say, it's okay if I don't have children, because you don't really care about the opinion of others about you, right? It's like, no, I'm walking my truth.
I think it is the penultimate of importance to listen to your own truth around this. I have certainly experienced clients who have let me know that they had children out of a feeling of obligation or responsibility, not out of true desire. I also know women who are now maybe even in their 70s who have regret about not having children. So I see it, in all the different ways, but I think it's all essentially to come back to this foundational piece of truth telling, and how honest am I willing to be about what I want. And listen, we're also in an age where I see so many women having children without a partner. Anything is possible. We're living in a time when we're not living in the heterosexual normative around having babies, and that's the only way to have a baby. There are many ways that people have babies and parent babies, and I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I think we really have the opportunity to design a life today that we could not have done one generation back, and it all is grounded in knowing ourselves.
Yes.
The truth telling that you're talking about. So I think this is beautiful. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So you left your marriage. What happened then? Because there's a big transformation coming on the horizon when you said, oh, my beautiful job may no longer be the best for me. How did that come about?
So right as I was getting ready to leave my marriage, in the process of leaving my marriage, I reached out to my dear friend and mentor, Debbie Ford. And I had been producing several of her events. She was a Hay House author. She has since left the planet. And at that time, it was actually my birthday in February 2010. And I reached out and said, we've got this event coming up this weekend. And she said, right. And so I shared a bit with her about what was going on. And she said, what I want you to do is have your staff do the event. And I want you to basically sit your ass in the chair and do the work. And so that is now just about 10 years ago. And that's really when my own inner healing journey began. So I did that workshop and then went on to work with one of her coaches. I worked with one of her coaches that through the process of me filing for divorce and moving through all of that. and then realized that I really loved the work and I wanted to.
In the inner work?
The inner work. I loved the inner work, and I loved Debbie's very particular way of teaching. And so I decided to go through her year-long coaching certification and training program.
And do you think, one question please, because at the beginning you said, even though since 2002 you put on these beautiful events, but you couldn't hear the teachings of this beautiful, like, you know, class A teachers couldn't sink in until you were like broken open by the experience you had, by your crisis, and then you could let it in.
Then I could let it in. I mean, a lot of what was happening was that what I ultimately realized was that the people I feared revealing myself to the most were the ones who rallied around me the fiercest. And I feel very fortunate. I had a very particular kind of A-list around me building my scaffolding. We all have our own A-list. You know, I had my parents, I had my sister, I had my friends. I also did have Louise Hay and Wayne Dyer and Marianne Williamson and Carolyn Mace and Debbie Ford and Cheryl Richardson. I mean, I did.
It was extraordinary. Yes.
It was. I mean, for the year of 2010, I essentially lived between my sister's house, Louise's house, Debbie's house, and Cheryl's house. For a year, I don't think I was ever home. So I decided I wanted to do Debbie's training course, not because I wanted to be a coach. I just wanted to continue this archaeological dig within. And it was more rigorous than my master's degree. It was really intense and really incredible. And unbeknownst to me, I found myself with my certification in hand on the other side of this training, really a changed woman. I was unrecognizable from who I was when I began it. And it was the first inkling that even though my job at Hay House had been my dream job, I was really feeling called and pulled to help other people get free.
And was it at the same token exciting and maybe also a little bit scary? Because that meant that you would eventually have to leave Hay House.
It was sort of all the things at once, but it was like happening in slow motion, because also right as I was in sort of the height of the, you know, the grizzle of my divorce, coworkers at Hay House were getting married, and I have a master's degree in poetry. They had asked me to write a poem and read it during their wedding ceremony, which was a lovely honor, but also, you know, ironic juxtaposition of what was happening in my own life. So I shared this poem during the ceremony, and Reid Tracy, the president of Hay House, who is really a very dear friend and mentor to me, he heard that poem, and you know, he said, "Nancy, you're a real poet." And I said, "Well, yes, I have a master's in poetry. Of course I'm a real poet." And he said, "So what I want you to start doing is, as you're emceeing the conferences and these events, I want you to start sharing your poems." And this was mind-blowing to me, because I always wrote for myself. Even in getting my master's, it was never about publishing. And my poems are, to me, very personal and very specific and very, very about me. So the idea that I would share them felt, you know, strange. And it's, you know, I had been emceeing our events, sometimes as big as over 7,000 people. Me being on stage is no issue. I love to be on stage. I love all that, but it's very different to introduce a speaker or the lunch break than it, you know, very different to do that than it is to actually get on stage and bare my soul. And yes, exactly.
Share your own words, your own
exactly
inner self. Yeah.
Yes. So I'll never forget, it was at one of our I Can Do It conferences in Pasadena. And it was a Friday night, and I was bringing Wayne Dyer on stage, and I shared a poem. And later that evening, a woman came up to me and said, "I thought I came here to this conference to hear Wayne Dyer, but I came here to hear that poem."
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
And it was really, you know, I really got that, you know, the more specific we are, the more universal it becomes. And so I then was in my, I was in my process at that time of really taking center stage for myself, coming out from behind the curtain and taking center stage. You know, I had always had the front row seat and the backstage pass to all the events. I was essentially the one shining the big spotlight on everyone else. And so I had to really start finding the place within me where I knew I was worthy and deserving of center stage and the spotlight myself.
And finding this truth, again, another truth for you, is that took a little while, and it's totally okay if it does.
I think it's natural for it to take time.
Yeah.
I think it has to be organic. I think it's natural that things like this take time. It was a big transition in my life to, you know, come out from behind the curtain and take center stage in my own space and time and to own it. And then from there go on to, you know, Reid said to me, why don't you self-publish a book of your poems? He was like, I'm not publishing it, but you could self-publish it. And I did. And then I went on to self-publish a second book. And it was in that period of time where I started to realize I wanted to leave my job. I was preparing the manuscript to self-publish my second book, Jump and Your Life Will Appear. And again, you know, self-publishing, it wasn't Hay House publishing it. And Reid was, you know, the CEO and president of Hay House. We were out on a walk in Australia, Melbourne, Australia. We were doing an event there. And he said to me, I have this feeling that you're at the end of your rope. And I said, I am actually at the end of my rope. And I wanted to come on this walk with you today because I want to let you know that I'm going to quit my job.
But he brought it up first. He brought it up first. We were friends. He knew me. And he said, you know, and he did. So he said that. And I said, well, I want to let you know I'm quitting my job. And he said, I'll tell you when you can quit your job. And how much later was that?
So we actually in that moment made a plan. We made about a 12 to 18 month plan. And he said, listen, I get that you want to go be a coach. I'm all for it. I want you to finish this book that you're writing and self-publish it like you said you're going to. I want you to get your platform up and running. I want you to get some, you know, build your client base so that when you leave your job, you have something to go to. Yes. And it was the best advice I could have ever received. Mm-hmm. And so
very smart advice. And yet, you know, so I heard, so it was Jump and Your Life Will Appear, right? That's
yes.
What because I read it in the past that Tracy, he did not publish your book, but he said you self-publish. And I think this is an important point to make, because you earned every single step that you took. Because he only then, I think Hay House took on your book after it sold. I mean, you sold.
Yeah, so I self-published the book in February of 2014.
Yeah.
And then in May of 2014, Reid called me and said, hey, your book is actually doing well. What he actually said was, your book's really doing well. You're going to get calls from publishers. And I wanted to make sure I was the first one to offer you a deal. And he said, so we want to pick the book up. And it was like, well, of course. Okay, great. Yeah. And then about 2 weeks later, he called me and said, you can leave your job now. And I started bawling my eyes out. And I'm like, you're firing me? And he said, I'm not firing you. This was our plan. Our plan was you were going to get all this going on so that you could leave. And this is the time. And he really, you know, quite frankly, you know, he had to give me a little kick for the jump, you know, because he really said, if you don't do this now, you're not going to leave. Here's the deal. This is the choice point. Beautiful. If you don't leave now, you're not going to. So you need to leave now. And he was right.
Yeah.
He was
yeah, you have a guardian angel in him too, huh? That he said, okay, now it's the time.
Yeah, and you know, the other piece that you know, it's important for me to name here is that, you know, for so much of my life, in addition to the things I said before about, you know, presenting this image of perfection and the managing the perception of others, so much of my life had been around really seeking external validation. and chasing all the gold stars and getting all the gold stars. But the truth is, no gold stars will ever be enough to fill the void. So anything we're seeking externally needs to be resolved internally first. And so when we're chasing this external validation and the gold stars and the accolades and the approval and the applause, it's really tricky to separate out our own sense of worth and value from that, because we essentially determine our value and worth by what we do, what we achieve, what we produce. And I will say that on that walk Reid and I were on in Australia, something he said to me, which, you know, echoes daily for me. And he said, you know, it's not about being indispensable at your job. It's about being irreplaceable as a human. And really getting that it wasn't about what I do, it's just simply about who I am. Because I was so entwined in the identity of my job. And who will I be without this? Just like I was, who will I be without the identity of my marriage? Who will I be without being linked to something else? Not really knowing who I was without that surrounding me, without the border surrounding me.
Yes.
And really being able to.
Let me ask you, who is Nancy today? 5.5 years after you left Hay House.
Yeah.
Who are you today? Like, tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most important thing I would say is I'm a woman who lives my life on my own terms. You know, I'm not directed by what other people think. I'm very protective over my space and time. I'm very choosy about the people that I spend my time with. I'm very devoted to my work. I'm very devoted to my clients. And I'm really essentially on a mission to help primarily women, but I have men clients too. So to help people really make themselves the priority in their own lives. So taking the attention off of everyone else and bringing it back to center.
Which is the perfect segue. I just wanted to, so in the last few years, you became not only a master coach, but you have your own coaching academy. Which is
yes. So yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. It's been something that has been a dream for a long time. It's been in the works. And then in the fall of 2019, I opened the doors to Levin Life Coach Academy and welcomed in my first group of students who will be certified Levin Life coaches next fall.
Yeah, this is, just you were, that's what I'm saying, like the progression of your life, it is getting more rich and rich as the years goes on. And now you are about to publish your 5th book.
Yes.
Yeah, which we talked about at the beginning. Please tell me, it is so important, and I never really thought about it that way. But when I started to read, setting boundaries will set you free, I realized that like so many of our issues and pains that we carry and such, if you break it down, it's a boundary issue. And I never thought about it in that way. So thank you so much. It's like beautiful that we have your work. Please, what are the biggest takeaways or the things that you learned when you wrote the book?
Yes, thank you. And, I would say the biggest things that I've learned are, first of all, understanding what boundaries are. So I define a boundary as a limit that I set around what I will or will not do, will or will not tolerate, and will or will not accept, so that I'm clear about what's okay and what isn't okay. I'm also clear about the boundary of where I end and someone else begins. Because as I was saying a little bit ago, I didn't really know how to define myself without what I was bumping up against, so to speak. A boundary allows me to be able to delineate myself and to really get clear on what's mine and what isn't mine, because so many of us take responsibility for things in our lives that are not our responsibility to take responsibility for.
Yes, yes, guilty. Absolutely.
Sure. And so what ends up happening is this is when we go into the overgiving. This is when we go into the overachieving. This is essentially when we're in the people pleasing. But the sort of shadow of all of that is that we're really manipulating and we're really trying to control something and someone.
Mm-hmm.
So really getting clear with the boundary work that the only thing that I have any control over is me. What's happening right here, you know, and that someone else's response to my truth is their responsibility. It's not my responsibility to manage someone else's experience of me. Mm-hmm. Because what often will happen is, first of all, the number one reason I hear that we don't set boundaries is we don't know what to say. So there's a whole piece in the book around scripts and tips and ways to begin working out the conversation of how to set boundaries. More importantly, or most importantly, is to really get that any boundary we set is ultimately between me and me, between you and you, even if there's another person involved. Because the secret that no one talks about in terms of boundary setting is that you are the one who needs to uphold your boundary. It's not anyone else's job to do so. So I hear from clients time and time again, I tried to set a boundary, but he or she kept doing the thing. Mm-hmm. He or she will keep doing the thing. It's not up to them to honor us. It's not up to them to respect, to adhere to any boundary we set. It's up to us. So if our boundaries are being crossed, we are the ones crossing our boundaries. We are the ones enabling them to be crossed. That is a game changer, because that moves us out of victim mode and into empowerment by taking responsibility for what's ours.
What would it also mean now, Nancy, that, for example, okay, so I'm setting a boundary with someone, but that someone may still react in the same way, me not setting boundaries or setting boundaries, but what you're saying, that's not my responsibility. That's not my... How
they react is not your responsibility. How you take care of yourself is.
Yes.
So you can set a boundary around what you will or will not do. And you can set the boundary around what you will do to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. Most of us think setting boundaries is pointing a finger at someone else saying, you always and you never, you always or you never, and you better not.
Yeah. And you will not do this to me anymore.
Right. And you will not do this to me anymore. Right. What I'm talking about is, when you raise your voice at me, I feel scared. So I'm just letting you know that moving forward, if you continue raising your voice at me in a conversation, I'm going to leave the house and take a walk around the block and then come back to finish.
Beautiful. So you're telling the other person how you feel and what the consequence will be if the person does the same thing.
Right. But I'm not saying don't yell at me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You see the difference? I'm not saying don't yell at me. I'm saying I feel scared when you yell at me. So if you decide to keep yelling at me, in order for me to take care of myself, I'm going to leave the house, take a walk around the block, and then come back and see if we can continue our conversation. But I have to be then willing to put my money where my mouth is. I have to be willing to leave the house. Otherwise, I'm a little girl who cried wolf. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I have to know that if the yelling continues, I'm enabling the yelling to continue. So the piece that then we have to sort of parse out is the way that when we cross our own boundaries, the telltale sign is noticing our level of resentment. Because the more
resentment to us or to the other person, or both?
When we feel resentful, It's a telltale sign that we have not set boundaries in our life. When we are saying yes instead of saying no, when we are acquiescing or compromising instead of standing our ground, telling the truth and collaborating, when we are in any way giving way without actually standing our ground, that's when the resentment's going to start to build.
Yes, makes total sense. Makes total sense. Please, one more question around boundary setting, because I think that for many women, we are not used, like in general, I think men are a little better than, no, does it matter?
I don't think any of us are really taught to set boundaries, and certainly we're not taught to speak about it in this kind of language.
Yeah.
I think we're used to thinking about boundaries as some kind of ultimatum.
Yes. And a firm no. Like when I think about a boundary, I did not think it in the way you just described it, of saying, okay, this is what I do, and then I will leave. It's like more like a boundary is like no, talk to the hand, but it's not what it is. So is the like, how can we start? It's like, where do we start in setting the boundaries?
Yes. So the important thing here is to understand that we're only going to be able to know our own boundaries if we know our own non-negotiables. So we actually have to get clear on what's okay and what's not okay. What can I live with and what won't I live without?
Okay.
And start to get clear about what's true for me, and then be able to move into expression. So being able, a really simple place to begin first is even, how many times do we have this kind of a conversation? Someone says to us, where do you want to go for dinner? I don't care. Where do you want to go?
Yes.
Even just begin with, I'm going to check in with myself and see what I actually want for dinner. I want sushi tonight. And then the other person might want Italian. And then there might be a conversation and a discussion about what you're going to have. I'll tell you that if you go for Italian after saying you want sushi, you'll feel less resentful as you're taking the bites of Italian, because you've at least expressed what you want. And there might be an agreement of, let's have Italian tonight and sushi next week, or something like that. But if you bite your tongue and don't ever say what you want, the resentment is going to be greater. Yeah. And it sounds like a silly example, but I know it's something we all can relate to, especially women. And we're so conditioned to just acquiesce or give in or not express. The same thing happens when a request is being made of us and we go right into our knee-jerk yes. We go right into a yes out of obligation, out of responsibility, out of not wanting someone else to be disappointed, not wanting someone else to be angry, or a yes because we want to come in as the hero.
Yeah.
But I want to say that when we say that kind of a yes, those are the yeses that we start thinking 2 seconds later, how the hell am I going to get out of this? Or time passes and then we see it sitting in our calendar and we're like, why do I have to go do this thing? Why did I say yes? So the idea is to be able to come in with the honest no from the get-go when it is not something that is out of genuine desire. So a yes is in response to something you desire. A no is when it's responsibility, obligation, managing anyone else's experience. Because what often happens for women too is we're so used to taking the hit that we'll just be like, oh, that other person's going to be disappointed if I say no. I'll just do it because I don't want them to be disappointed, and I'll just suck it up. Right? That's our go-to.
Yep.
But here's the thing. We create chaos in our lives when we don't tell the truth. So if I go all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, I know that younger version of me wrote about that affair in her journal because she did not know how to set a boundary in her marriage. She didn't know how to tell the truth. I'm not excusing her behavior, but I'm very clear on why she did it. And she did the only thing she knew how to do at the time. But she also set a bomb that detonated 8 years later. Mm-hmm. So when we don't tell the truth, we create chaos, and it will come out, and it will come out sideways. So we do not have to wait for a crisis in our life to make change. I really am here to say, rock your own foundation before it rocks you. You know, be able to assess what's happening, take the reins, take responsibility for your life, tell the truth, say yes when you want to say yes, say no when you want to say no, take yourself into consideration first. So this is the thing. Most of us are considering everyone else's feelings, and we aren't even considering our own at all. So the invitation here is really consider yourself at least as much as, if not more, than you're considering everyone else, and start to act from there. So you asked how to begin. This is how to begin. And for anyone watching who wants to jump in and be like, but isn't that selfish? Yes, it is selfish. And I'm all for selfish. Selfish, self-love, self-care, 3 sisters whose job it is to support you in honoring yourself.